Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and I am super excited to bring you part 3 of the Simple Fish Keeping series. This is the last part, at least for 2021 on this channel, but I think I've saved the best for last in this video. We are going to be asking YouTubers what was the biggest mistake they made when it came to buying a fish. What was the number one fish mistake that they made? Towards the end of the video, I will share mine. Big thank you to all the creators who contributed. Appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoy the video.
10 years ago, I think maybe, or a little bit more, I had built a plywood aquarium. It was 240 gallons. Now, believe it or not, and this will just give you an idea of what my local hobby is like in Atlantic, Canada, that was, at the time, reported to be the largest private aquarium in Atlantic, Canada. 240 gallons, believe it or not. Everybody knew about it. A fish got dropped off about 200 miles away at a fish store, and it was an alligator gar. It was like 2 feet long, and people were like, Joey, you gotta get this fish, you gotta rescue it, you gotta take it. I'm like, I don't want to. I built this tank for me and my fish and my stingrays and arowana, and I don't really want to have a big alligator gar, but I kind of felt pressured, especially from my local club, and I didn't want people to be upset with me. I still wanted to be accepted, and I buckled to that type of pressure, and within 24 hours, that fish was dropped off at my house. The following night, I heard a splash, turned on the, and it was a splash. I turned on the lights, and the alligator gar was swimming by with what looked like a dog bone in its mouth sideways. That dog bone was not a bone, it was my silver arowana. I was mortified, killed it. But what do you do? I mean, I agreed to take this fish in. I didn't really want it. They are high-end predators, and within a couple of nights later, in bed again, and this tank is in my bedroom, I hear a smash, and I mean a smash. I wake up, flip the lights on, glass all through the tank. The alligator gar spooked and smashed through the lids, which were 6mm thick plate glass, which is what a 55-gallon tank is built out of. So if you ever want to keep monster fish, yes, they can break your tank potentially. I look on the ground, the alligator gar looks to be dead. I take him, it's 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I gotta wake up at 7 o'clock. I don't have time to dispose of the fish. I take him, put him in a bucket, I put him outside. Mind you, this was in October. That morning when I wake up, I go outside, I start the car, scrape the frost off of the car, getting ready, and I hear a move happening in the bucket. It was the bucket with the alligator gar. I thought, oh great, mice are eating him alive. I go over to the bucket and there's no mice in there. I turn around again and it rattles again, like you hear the bucket, like that plastic. I look again, and the alligator gar is flopping around. He's still alive because alligator gar can actually breathe oxygen or atmospheric oxygen as well. So I take him in the house, I put him in a Rubbermaid tote with a sponge filter, get it set up, and I go to work. Ended up being able to rehouse him, shipping him out west to a place that had a few thousand gallons, and that fish I regret getting because it was just nothing but a nightmare, and it taught me a very valuable lesson not to buckle to that type of pressure again, because a lot of times it just doesn't.
I honestly can't say that I view any fish that I've ever kept as a mistake. There's always something new to learn and grow from with each one that you keep. If I had to choose though, it would be a fish that I kept recently without success, and that would be the black ghost knifefish. They're my all-time favorite fish, but unfortunately they're pretty finicky and delicate. At least from what I've seen.
What fish was my biggest mistake and why? So I'm someone who usually sticks with the betta fish family because that's just what I'm really interested in. But one time I decided to be a little bit adventurous. I had this little interest in a fish called Tenopoma angorsii. One day I just saw them for sale on a wholesaler's list, and I was like, you know what? I think this little fish is really beautiful, and there's not a whole lot of information out there on it. I'm gonna go ahead and try it. It's kind of a smaller African fish that's distantly related to betta fish. I got them. They were neat. I got them into a planted tank to live in like a group setting, because that's what I read online that you could do in like a highly planted, dense tank. You could have a group of them. And they were pretty, but they ended up being so aggressive to each other, just beating the snot out of each other, that after a while I started to think to myself like, oh, maybe maybe this wasn't a good idea. But I still kept all of those fish for about 3 years. So Tenopoma and Gorsii, very, very cute, but just it wasn't for me. Thanks Primetime Aquatics for having me on. You guys have a great day.
So one of the worst fish I bought, not the fish, but for me, was the dragon puffer. I shouldn't have bought that fish. I didn't do enough research. I saw it in the shop. I asked the opinions of the guys in the shop, but they very clearly just wanted to sell it to me. I was under the impression that it was always sort of quite active in that. I bought it, got it home, and noticed I'd never seen it. Now, I did the research into the behavior rather than just the requirements for it. So that was the first mistake. I didn't look at the behavior of the fish. Now they are ambush predators, these kind of fish, dragon puffers, and they stay like sort of hidden a lot of the time, waiting for their food so they can just bam, just grab it. Now, I mean, that was quite cool to see, don't get me wrong, but like 99% of the time, I didn't even know where the fish was. It was just an empty tank. So it wasn't ideal for me. I eventually took it back and it got rehomed. But yeah, don't rush into things. Always look at the behavior of the fish as well. I mean, back then I wanted big flashy things and stuff in my tanks. I'd probably be actually really happy to have one now and have it in a tank that was just to the side and didn't see it as often as some of the other fish. But back then I wanted like things, you know, like big thing. Yeah, you live and learn, don't you?
What fish was your biggest mistake and why? I don't even have to think about that one. It is a red-tailed catfish. The story goes like this. I bought this fish for my youngest son, who was like 5 at the time. He picked him out. I saw the red-tailed cat was about that big. They usually are when you find them in the store. A little teeny thing. I knew this fish was going to get huge, but my plan was to put this fish in a 125-gallon tank. Definitely not big enough, but hold on, with arowanas and some other fish. But my plan was to eventually move up to an 8-foot tank, which still isn't big enough for a red-tailed cat, but that's what the kid wanted, and I didn't have the guts to disappoint him. I said, okay, we can get that fish, no problem. And almost instantly, when I brought that fish home, I knew it was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake before I did it, but once I got him, I knew it was too. Great fish to keep, very entertaining, very beautiful, just a cool fish, but you immediately start having problems when you keep these fish. Basically, all of the food that I would throw in the tank, that catfish would get, which meant none of the other fish were getting as much food as they needed, and the more you put in, the more that catfish is going to go up and eat it. That's what catfish do. One time, that fish ate so much that it couldn't swim. It was down on the bottom of the tank, just kind of teeter-tottering back and forth on his belly that looked like it was about to explode. It was actually horrifying, and it was then that I made the decision that I was going to go ahead and rehome that fish. It was very sad for me. I dreaded doing that for the longest time, but then I went to my youngest and I said, hey dude, I'm really sorry, but we're gonna have to find a new home for that fish. And he was like, I don't care. All that worrying I did, and it didn't even bother him. But anyway, yeah, I knew this is the reason why it was such a problem for me. I knew it was gonna be a mistake, and I did it anyway. Impulse control is a huge problem in this hobby, and I'm certainly guilty of that. So don't make that mistake. If you don't have a pond, not even something like this is 360 gallons, a red-tailed cat isn't even gonna fit in that. Maybe for a couple of years, but once it starts to grow, no. Unless you have some kind of massive pond or something like that, don't make the mistake that I did and get a red-tailed catfish.
My biggest fish mistake would have to be my clown Plagos. Slightly more expensive, very beautiful. I haven't seen them since I welcomed them home to their new tank. Every time I come in to show my friends my fish tank, they're nowhere to be found. I drop in their food, but I don't really see much of them. Kind of a mistake because I had higher expectations of seeing them around, but they're still here.
So the one fish that was my biggest mistake, and it's going to be my mistake for a different reason than what you're thinking, but is a blood red parrot. So I bought a parrotfish just because I thought they were so cute. They're these little balls and they're orange and they're so cool looking and they got a ton of personality. So I bought one of those. Turned out it was a female, so I got one to have a friend and it turned out to be a male, and then we wanted another one, so we ended up getting 3 for a 125-gallon tank. They lived with us for about 7 years until they all passed away, and they were really fun fish, but the thing is, like, they have a hard time eating, and for that reason I always felt bad for them. They always wanted to breed, and The eggs were never fertile, so it was kind of sad to watch that. So for all those reasons, I would never get that fish again, but I love their personality. I love the looks of them, but I don't like how they're breeding them to look a certain way, even though it's not best for the fish. And so for those reasons, I would say I will never get a blood parrot again. And that was one of my mistakes as an early fish keeper, because I didn't know what went into making that fish. And so I would never buy a fish knowing that it wasn't, like, knowing that that fish shouldn't be in the hobby. And so that's just kind of the biggest mistake that I've ever made as far as buying a fish that I shouldn't have bought. But I still love them. I still enjoy them. I gave them a great home. And at the end of the day, I don't regret having them, but I wouldn't do it again.
For having me on here. I'm LRB Aquatics. I'm an aquarium hoarder, and the question is, which fish was the biggest mistake for me and why? So when it comes to this, besides the $2,500 worth of butterfly koi, I fed pretty much to a wild mink, or well, let me just say the mink fed itself. That was a huge mistake, but I didn't really see that coming. I guess that's kind of where mistakes go. But besides that, I would say buying a Chinese algae eater and putting them in a community tank with a lot of rocks in them in a big tank. Because he was just kind of a bully, and he was pretty much impossible to get out of that tank. So he was just a pain when it came to a fish. Was a Chinese algae eater. So yeah, I would say that's my biggest mistake with a fish, and thanks for watching.
My biggest mistake as far as purchasing a fish was probably back in 2018. I hadn't been in the hobby as far as keeping a fish tank of my own for probably a year. And I went to this fish show and I saw these adorable little baby discus, and at the end of the show I left with 12 of them, and it was an extremely impulsive decision. I shouldn't have done it for multiple reasons. I wasn't prepared to have these fish. I had to do a very quick cycle, and not only that, I got discus from somewhere I wasn't familiar with. So you add all that together, and it's kind of a disaster waiting to happen. And long story short, I did lose those fish, and I regret it so much. So impulsive shopping for fish is not a good idea.
Fish was your biggest mistake and why? I think that could be interpreted a couple different ways, but I'm gonna go with what was a fish that you got and then it turned out to not be a good fit. That's tough for me because over the years, I've had a lot of different fish, but I've always had a really good resource being the local fish store guy that knows everything. So he's really helped me to not pick the wrong fish for what I want to do with them. So I'm really lucky to have that. I know that not everybody does. So find yourself a really knowledgeable fish person to help you when making fish purchases. But for me specifically, I think even recently I got some clown killies and I put them in one of the 50-gallon tanks behind me. Didn't have a lid on any of these because I just don't do lids, and that was a mistake. Maybe not my biggest mistake, but that's one that I can think of right now, and they disappeared. I think they all jumped out behind the tank. Can't really get back there, but that was definitely a mistake that I made. And it was recent, so we never stop making mistakes. Hopefully we learn from those. I know I certainly did in that circumstance, but yeah, lots of mistakes to be learned in this hobby, and I guess that's part of the journey. Hopefully you don't make too many.
Fish was your biggest mistake, and I was lucky that my biggest fish mistake purchase was at the same time my best fish purchase, but my silver arowana was an impulse buy that I do not recommend. I was in no way prepared to bring home even a baby silver arowana at the time. Luckily, we got to know each other better, and I was able to upgrade tanks when I needed to. Now this silver arowana is pushing 2 feet and in a large aquarium that still needs to be upgraded again. So I would have to say that silver arowana was a pretty big mistake to buy just because I was not prepared at all for this purchase. And I took my time to research, which I should have done beforehand, and it's worked out so far. But again, don't impulse buy monster fish of any sort.
What's cracking, YouTube? It's me, the Biz, Fishy Biz Aquatics, professional aquatics with the amateur. So you want to know the Biz's biggest fish mistake? I kind of kept this deep, dark, locked away, never to return. It all started when I was going to Walmart and buying fish. This was back when Walmart had fish, and I was thinking that these guys don't know what they're doing. You know, I can go in there, I can rescue some of these fish, get some nice expensive fish for cheap, put them in a better environment, grow them out, have a beautiful tank, and I decided to do that. And everything was going great until I went and purchased the dreaded dragonfish. If you look at a dragonfish, look at that dragonfish. It looks prehistoric, right? I mean, it's got the dragon face, skull face, looks like Skeletor from He-Man, if those who remember He-Man. I'm talking about just a hideous fish, very eel-like, but at the same time in its own, it just still was a remarkable fish. I looked at it, didn't do the research on it. And that is where the problem lies. Didn't do the research on the dragonfish. Saw that it looked tough. It looked like it was built for, like, it just get in your tank and kill everything in your tank. And I was like, back then I was hardcore, you know, kill and eat other fish and stuff like that. But not in the tank like that. You know, I had wanted to get piranhas, and then I ended up getting puffers just because they kind of eat meat and stuff like that. You go through those phases, okay? All right, you'll go through it too, promise you. Look. All right, long story short, purchased about 3 or 4 of them for the low, and put them in my Mbuna tank, thinking that yes, these Mbunas are aggressive. Yes, you know, they go after things and everything else, but these dragonfish, they can hold their own. They can hold their own. I put the dragonfish in there, y'all. And after acclimating, of course, and it was not, yeah, they shouldn't really be called dragonfish. They should be called Puff the Magic, Denver the Last little softy baby dragon netty. They shouldn't have been. They got toe up from the flow up, pretty much. I had to try to save them as much as possible and get them into their own tank and try to restore them. The scales, those Mbunas were tearing up. Later on, I did a little research and found out that they're more of a community tank fish. They're pretty docile. They were not what I thought they were, to say the least. And yeah, thanks a lot, Jason, for making me spill the beans on that. That was I can't even. I'm done. I can't do this.
So the fish that was my biggest mistake in the aquarium hobby was actually my Caribe piranha. For anybody that knows me, you know I love these fish. It's not because they're piranha and it was a bad choice to get piranha. I've been keeping piranha and breeding them for over 10 years. My biggest mistake was the fact that I got too comfortable with these fish. I've had my hand in the tank with piranha over 1,000 times over the years. Never had a problem. I had one particular instance where I wasn't paying attention and I didn't notice some breeding behavior. That right there is what happens when you're not paying attention. So yeah, that would be why Caribe piranha, my biggest mistake in the aquarium hobby. Not because they're a bad fish, but because I did something stupid.
So the fish that was my biggest mistake is actually surprisingly not a specific fish species, but a particular group of fish that I brought into my fish room. And a lot of times you'll hear on YouTube, quarantine your fish, do have a good quarantine procedure, because disease can, when it gets you, and particularly gets your fish room and your fish tanks and your fish, it can really get you. And in this case, I did quarantine the fish, but it was in my fish room. I don't have a quarantine outside of my fish room since all of my tanks are in the same room. And this was a viral strain that spread throughout all my tanks. And the worst part is, while it didn't really affect my shrimp, it didn't affect any of my cichlids, my guppies, it was more so a species specific issue, and it affected a lot of my bettas. And while I was able to work with my vet, my fish vet, to figure things out, I was not able to save all of my fish, so that I did lose a couple bettas that year, and that really made me really sad, because it's something that I feel like could have been prevented, but at the same time I can't really beat myself up over it, because no matter how much you try and how hard you try to prepare, there's always going to be something that will like slip through the cracks. So my best advice is just try your best. Be as careful as you possibly can to prevent a lot of things, but also know that things happen. Things will happen whether you do everything perfectly, just things will sometimes go wrong, and all you can do is try your best to prevent it from happening. So.
Hi there, it's Mike from the Fish Tank Barn, and let's talk about the fish that was my biggest mistake, the Mesoheros ultramaculatus. I purchased this fish at the rare fish auction at the Big Fish Deal back in 2020, right before the pandemic began. I was announcing fish bags for the auction, and when this fish came up, I purchased it without doing the proper research. This fish is a close relative of the Feste cichlid, which is a large, big, bruising South American cichlid. This fish was a juvenile at the time that I purchased it, but as you can see, this fish has now turned out to be quite large. But fortunately, it's been a model citizen here in this 245-gallon tank with other South American cichlids. Thankfully, this fish isn't as aggressive or grow as large as its other Feste cousins. I found this experience to be a valuable reminder to always do your research before purchasing any new aquarium fish.
Hi, I'm Joanna with the Small Scape. What is my biggest fish mistake? Oh, that's a clear winner right there. I once got well, I've had scarlet batis in the past, and I really love that fish. And then we went to a fish store and they had the batis asamensis, and they were really beautiful. We got a male and a female. We put them in my beloved 12-gallon long tank, and really beautiful fish. But we did have them in with some Lampirasboras, which were a little bit on the smaller size. I didn't really know that they were that small compared to this little guy. And in no time flat, we had the batis and a lot less fish left in the tank. So yeah, he was a little mean, and he doesn't really mind if my hand is in the tank. He doesn't mind at all. He's got a lot of personality, but boy, is he a stinker.
All right, so what was my biggest fish mistake? I've made some. I've made more than one. I think one that stands out was the stocking that I had in our 150. When I first got that 150, I thought it was a big tank and I wanted some bigger fish. So I went out and I bought some tinfoil barbs and some ballast sharks. And those fish, one, they like to be kept in groups, and two, they get very large, and three, they get very active. And so the 4-foot, 150-gallon tank that I had wound up not being sufficient for their size and activity level. This is a fish, if I could go back and do it again, one, I wouldn't have bought it unless I had at least an 8-foot tank. Don't get me wrong, these are great fish with awesome personality, great color, relatively easy to keep. They just weren't a good fit for that particular aquarium, especially for the other inhabitants in that tank, which tend to be a little bit more docile, a little bit less active, like severums and angelfish. So that was probably, at least recently, the biggest fish keeping mistake, I think, in terms of stocking ideas or stocking options in a tank. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to see more of the fish keeping series, check out these videos in the upper and lower right hand corner, as well as in the description below. If you want more information about the creators, check out their channels in the description below as well. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.